Okay, so where are we up to? Did we finish on Lamed Amid Beis? Well, we may have finished on Lamed Amid Beis, but I think we should review it.
Yeah, we're still
because I think we're still. How many lines before the end of the Amid are we officially? 6 lines. So again, what we're trying to figure out here is there's almost like an inconsistency in the Mishnah on Lamed Amid Beis, because when it comes to Kiddushin, and you want to say, you want to paskin choletzes v'lo misyabemes, so you have this case of a suffix, which is, when the tzara, I should say, the tzara is choletzes v'lo misyabemes. We have a case of a suffix in zrika, suffix karv lo, suffix karv lo, and that's as far as Kiddushin is concerned. In the Sefer, we get to the suffix in Gerushin. There, the Mishnah comes up with different kinds of psulim derabbanans, like, for example, kosav la b'ksav yado v'ein alav edim, and so forth and so on. And the Gemara now is trying to work very hard to explain why the Mishnah in the Sefer, in the case of Gerushin, could not possibly come up with the same suffix of Zarak lo get, Safek Karv lo, Safek Karv lo. That's what the Gemara says here on Lamed Amid Beis, Ve'ilu b'gerishin, Safek Karv lo kintani, my time. And that's where we had this whole dialogue between Rabbah and Abaye. So Abaye Rabbah put all the emphasis on what's called the Cheskas Heter. And in this case, he's talking about a Cheskas Heter Shuk. In other words, when Shimon is married to two women, one of whom is an Erev on Ruvain, and he gives a get to his wife who's an erva, that puts the other wife into a situation where she falls for yibum. She becomes a Yevamot Shuk. She can't marry anyone without chalitza. Why is that? Because the get now breaks the relationship between the erva who received the get and her tzara, such that the tzara is no longer a tzara's erva, now she falls for yibum. But before he gives her the get, the other wife is a tzara. And if she's a tzara's erva, then she doesn't fall for yibum, she's allowed to marry anyone from the shuk. So she has what's called a cheskas hetel shuk. And now if you have doubts as to whether or not this get was valid or not, we should assume that the get is not valid, which means that the tzara remains in her original status as a tzara's erva, hence she remains muteris l'shuk because she doesn't fall for yibum. And that was Rabbah's analysis of why the Sefer in the case of Gerushin could not be Safek Karv Lo, because we would certainly assume that the get was Karv Lo, meaning the get was invalid. And since it's invalid, we maintain the status of the other wife who falls for Yibum now to Ruvain as its Tzaras Erev, because the get is invalid. So that's called in the Gemara's language, Al Tasrenu Misafek. You see that? Al Tasrenu Misafek. It's about 6 lines up before the end of Lamed Amid Beis. That phrase, Al Tasrenu Misafek, is really the key to understand Rabbah. It's like a shortcut for understanding Rabbah. Okay, now Abaye wants to apply the same logic of Cheskas Heter to the case of the Reisha. In the Reisha, Shimon gave Kiddushin to an erva he has another wife. And if that Kiddushin would be valid, then his wife is a Tzaras Erev. Now, Abai says that before the Kiddushin, this woman, who's not an Ereva, has a Cheskes Heter Liyavam. Again, it's totally different than the Cheskes Heter that we spoke about in the context of Rabbah. And with that Cheskes Heter Liyavam, we have to assume that the Kiddushin is not Kiddushin. And therefore, if the Kiddushin is not Kiddushin and this woman falls for Yibum, she's not a Tzaras Ereva, he should be allowed to consummate Yibum. And there's no reason why the Mishnah says, Choletzes v'eina misyabemes. Why eina misyabemes? Because maybe she's a Tzaras Ereva. No. We're going to assume that the Kiddushin is not valid. Again, it was Karav Lo and not Karav Lo. Hence, she's not a Tzaras Ereva and she falls for Yibum. Let's allow Yibum. And again, we should be consistent because you, Rabbah, are insisting on Chazaka, and any suffix that arises, we will be machriya the suffix in the light of the Chazaka. So just like in the case of Gerushin, where you had a Chezkas Heter L'Shuk, which meant that she is a Tzaras Ereva, we can have the opposite Chazaka to assume that she's not a Tzaras Ereva. In the case of Gerushin, we're going to assume that she's a Tzaras Ereva because we're going to disqualify the get. If we disqualify the get, she still remains a Tzaras Ereva. And in the case of Kiddushin, we're going to maintain her chazaka of nofeles liyibum, of a heter yibum. That's called a cheskes heter liyavam, by invalidating the Kiddushin. So just like we invalidated the get in order to establish this, the tzara as a tzaras ereva, we're going to invalidate the Kiddushin and come to the exact opposite conclusion. She's not a tzaras ereva. And if she's not a tzaras ereva, then misyabemes. And now again, if you want to underline the key words of Abaye, that would be al tasrenu misafek. Where's that? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 lines up. Al tasrenu misafek. The same identical 3 words that we had in Rabbah, which was al tasrenu misafek. But again, it's very fascinating because the al tasrenu misafek in Rabbah's frame of reference with regard to the Sefer of Gittin is the exact opposite of al tasrenu misafek in the ratio, the way Abai is interpreting it. And again, if you don't mind the Chazara, if it's not coming out of your ears, but for me, it's always a good idea to do more Chazara. The al tasrenu misafek of Rabbah vis-a-vis Gerushin is to assume her status as a tzaras ereva. The al tasrenu misafek of Abaye, in the case of Kiddushin, is to assume that she's not a tzaras ereva. So in the ratio, in the Sefer of Gittin, we're weighing in that she is a tzaras ereva. I think yesterday we called her Sarah, but anyway. And in the Sefer, we're weighing in, and in the ratio Kiddushin, we're weighing in that she's not a tzaras ereva. But in both cases, it's a cheskes heter. One is a cheskes heter l'shuk, and the other is a cheskes heter liyav. So now the Gemara with 2 words offers an answer to Abaye's objection to Rabbah in defense of Rabbah, and the 2 words are hasam l'chumra. And after that, the Gemara is going to attack and try to undermine this statement of hasam l'chumra. So let's try to again review the last thing that we discussed yesterday about hasam l'chumra. And then we'll see why it's a chumra dasing today takol. And hasam l'chumra means that we go back to the doraisa and then we superimpose the chumra d'rabbanan. So on a doraisa level, she is muteres liyavon. So we're talking again about a case where he threw the kesef kedushin safek of law, and that's to the erva. When I say erva, I mean Shimon's erva, not right. I mean Ruvain's erva, not Shimon's erva. If you follow me. And what there are, right? So if we simply take chazaka and go with it the entire way from A to Z, and we are adukim, we are absolutely committed to chazaka, which is what the Torah is going to tell us, that we uki gavra b'cheskase. Here we're going to assume with chazaka that the kedushin to the erev of Reuven is not valid, and therefore, if it's not valid, the other wife of Shimon, we called her Sarah, she falls for Yibum to Reuven, the death of Shimon, and that Yibum would be biblically permissible. The Rabbanan suspend the operation of chazaka because of the real suffix. When I say the real suffix, I mean the suffix on the ground. The chazaka is a conceptual, legal achra of a suffix, but it has no bearing on the, what we call in Hebrew, the mitziut bashetach. In the mitziut bashetach, we don't know where the kedushin fell. She wanted to receive the kedushin. She was very eager to marry him. We just don't know where it fell. And we have no way of knowing, that it stopped 49 or 51. So the Rabbanan are saying, let's be machmir, and we're going to block Yibum. We're not going to allow the wife of Shimon, Sarah, to be misyabemes befall to Reuven with the death of Shimon. So that wife of Shimon will not be allowed to be misyabemes because she might be a tzaras erev, which means we might want to validate the kedushin. What would be the compelling logic to validate the kedushin? It would be, right, because again, on the Doraisa level, we have chazakas here. Let's fall back on chazakas. Truth be told, there are two chazakas. It's the chazaka of Yevamot liyavam heter yimu, which tells me that the kedusha was not valid. And there's a chazaka of a pnuya who's muteres to every person until we find out that she got married. So you want to be mechadis that she got married, is your right, the burden of proof is on you to establish that she left us previous status quo of heter and entered into the status of H&C. So that's all on a deraisa level, and we're gung ho in favor of Yibum. Let Sarah be misyabemes to Reuben. Come along the Rabbanon, and they have a chum, because in the minds of the spectators, it looks like Sarah is a tzaras erev. They're not operating in the world of chazakas. They just see Shimon give, throw a ring, let's say a diamond ring, in the direction of what should we call Rivka, and he recites the famous words Harei at mekudeshes li in front of two Eidim. So they think therefore that Sarah is a tzaras erev. Right, because Rivka is an erva to Reuven, so Sarah becomes a tzaras erva if we validate the kedushin. And now they're going to see that Reuven is going to be miyabeim Sarah. How could that be? Unless the Torah allows Yibum, even in the case of a tzaras erva, which again intuitively we would have said that for sure Yibum should apply to a tzaras erva. But what difference does it make if the other wife is an erva, but she's not an erva? Let's be all gung ho in favor of Yibum. So therefore, the Gemara says that in the case of kedushin, we're going to require chalitza. On a Doraisa level, we would allow for Yibum. The Rabbanan are going to suspend Yibum and require Chalit. So now the Gemara asks, Hai Chumra di Asil de Kulahu. And the Gemara here, at the bottom of Daf Lamed Amud Beis, is going to set up two scenarios in which you have a Kula di Asil lidei, you have a Chumra di Asil lidei Kula. Which is, by the way, this phrase in the Gemara, just as a side note, is a phrase that appears all over Shas. And it basically warns us not, we're very excited and we're very motivated to take on a Chumrah, but hold everything. Sometimes a Chumrah ends up with a Takola, a Kula. You have to be very careful with chumras. You have to really